everyone. Today we're going to explore a paradigm shift in test automation, because I would like to talk about, well, probably everyone's favorite topic, communication. And, well, don't worry, not so much about human communication as it is about technical communication in our language-first approach. As we all know, the landscape of test automation is constantly evolving. With each passing day, new tools, new frameworks emerge, promising to be the next big thing. And when I started, for example, in 2012 with automating test cases, it was a brand new area of expertise. We testers were coming from a place where our most advanced piece of technology was Microsoft Excel, and suddenly we had this incredible opportunity to automate our work. But there was a catch, and that was that we practically had to become full-fledged software developers overnight. I still remember diving in headfirst into learning Java, of course, grappling with Selenium, learning OCR libraries to tackle Oracle Forms type of application. It was well, it was mostly a technical challenge, really, where we focused more on building robust test automation frameworks than we were focusing on the testing itself. And also, let's not forget, the only thing we were doing actually were regression tests and end-to-end tests. Unfortunately, now the landscape has evolved, and we got tools like Cypress, where we don't need to spend all our time reinventing the wheel. Now we can focus on what really matters, and that is testing the software for our clients. But that is not all, of course, because we can truly also use the shift-left approach, for example. We're no longer limited to just end-to-end testing. We can test components, we can test APIs, or even entire front ends in isolation. Now, you might be wondering, does this mean we should stop thinking about our framework design? Well, I personally believe we still need to think about framework design, but in a different way. Because I think it's no longer about building a technical framework from scratch, but more about how we can best utilize, customize these powerful tools to fit our specific needs. So you could say that the landscape of test automation is indeed evolving, and our work has to evolve with it. So what this means basically is that we're moving more from being sort of code warriors to more strategic testers, focusing more on what to test rather than how to build the test infrastructure. And I think that's really, really important. Well, let me paint you a picture of what I like to call the tool trap in test automation. It is a scene we've all witnessed, maybe even starred in ourselves. Think about it. You got a room full of passionate testers, developers, and maybe a couple of project managers. A very familiar but very old discussion is going on. Which automation tool is the best? On one side, you got the Selenium loyalists singing praise of its versatility, and on the other side, you got the Cypress enthusiasts championing its speed and ease of use. And still, we don't forget we have the playwright proponents in the corner over there for arguing for its cross-browser capabilities. And also, let's not forget, there's always one tester there who is upselling this amazing low-code platform. And they're actually targeting those testers who want all the benefits of test automation, but they don't have the necessary requirements or the skills to code. So you got 4 different flavors there. If you think about the managers there, you can if you look at the table there, you can see the glazed look in their eyes. To them, it's very simple. We need testers. Testers should automate, and automation makes testing faster. So they don't really care which tools you choose, which tools you use, as long as you do the job right. And it's not their fault, really, because, well, test automation for them is the tool. It's a young field, and its full potential is not really known to a lot of people, not even testers. So what is the result of all this, if you think about it? Well, it's like if you're building a house and you're arguing about which tools to use, not so much about what you want to achieve. So you get stuck in a sort of tool selection paralysis. And this, if you get this is actually something that your testing process becomes very rigid through. So we fall into a trap of thinking that there can only be one tool to rule them all, and this tool is sort of a guarantee for success, which is not, of course. But what's very interesting is here, while everybody is debating tools and running the same old end-to-end test, we're still missing out on a lot of other possibilities in our test automation landscape, because we're focusing so much on the how that we forget to ask about the what and the why. And, well, I think that is what I like to call a conventional approach to test automation, because it often leads to rigidity, because we're only talking about tools. So it leads to rigidity in our processes, and also it leaves us unprepared for new challenges, new changes in the future. But well, I discovered actually that there is a much more better way to do this. What if I told you that, well, we've been looking at this all wrong actually, that instead of endlessly debating which tool is best, we should be focusing more on something much more fundamental. And I'm actually talking about the programming language itself, because after all, we all are sort of developers, sort of. So also, why not approach our work strategically, like you would a development project? The only difference basically between a developer and a test engineer is in the requirements. So if you think about this and you use this opens up a world of possibilities. So imagine, well, a sort of unified framework, maybe a testing framework that can use a lot of different things. It can play nice with application code. It can play nice with Cypress, but also goes beyond it, laying a sort of foundation for a testing strategy which is comprehensive, which is flexible, which is future-proof. And this approach, by using it, is something that's very customizable. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. And so it's very important to ask a couple of questions for that. So ask yourself the following questions, for example. Why do we need test automation? What type of tests do we need to automate? What does our technical landscape look like? Do we shift left? Do we shift right? What are the challenges faced on the technical stack? Can we make it adaptable to change in the future? And from a non-technical standpoint, what is our current way of working, and how much wiggle room do we actually have in our agile or DevOps organization to pioneer, to try out new things? And also, can we create a sort of balance between agreements over all the teams and still have some freedom to make our own choices that best suit us, our team, and our project goals? So I think it's very important to remember that this is not so much about the destination, about where you want to go. It's much more about asking the right questions along the way, about the path. So you have to make a solution that is flexible, adaptable, and scalable. I want to talk a little bit about Jamie Wheal for a minute. And don't worry if you haven't heard of him. He's not a testing guru, but I think he has some insights which are very interesting for us. So bear with me. Who is Jamie? Jamie is head of the Flow Genome project, and his job is actually helping everyone from CEOs to Marines all over the world achieving their flow state and become more effective in what they do. After training elite leaders for 40 years, we're talking about people in war zones, big mountain climbers, Silicon Valley CEOs, he made a very interesting discovery. Most projects, they don't fail because of lack of funding, because of technology, because of their mission. They fail because of good old-fashioned human problems, which are conflict and confusion. And 80% of those failures, well, they come from the same 20% of recurring patterns in how we make decisions and in how we communicate. So if you think about it, it's like we're all tripping over the same rock over and over again. But there's also something very interesting here, because Jamie also found out that when everyone in your team shares the same tools and shares the same language, you instantly raise performance. And I'm not talking about a little boost, because, well, he has shown with his teams where he worked with that this even works under the toughest circumstances. So it's like you suddenly make your whole team collectively smarter without having to raise anyone's IQ, actually. So it's really cool. Now, if you bring this back to our world of test automation, I've seen organizations where there are different teams in the same organization using Cypress with completely different custom configurations, while other teams use other tools. Now, for the sake of argument, let's say all the teams use some form of JavaScript. You can still ask the question, are we still speaking the same language? And this is actually where our language-first approach becomes very interesting, where it's going to shine, because the language-first approach is not about forcing everyone into the same rigid mold. It's about creating a framework which is very adaptable. You might compare it with a Swiss Army knife. It's very important, if you're going to do this, that you give all teams room to utilize it in a way that works best for them, while still sharing common agreements, common functionalities. So I'll give you a more specific example. For example, you've got one team doing component tests with Cypress, another team working with all sorts of plugins installed on top of Cypress, and a third team doing end-to-end tests with some other tool, which uses the same language here. Now, with our approach, with the language-first approach, they can all share common functionalities. And I'm talking about configurations, custom commands, you name it, they can share it actually. It's all still the same ecosystem. Now, when using multiple testing tools, we can all speak the same language, but each tool keeps their unique identities. So when we talk about a language-first approach, we're not just talking about writing better tests, we're talking actually about transforming how teams communicate, how they collaborate, and how they conquer challenges. So we're actually talking about raising our collective IQ for our testing efforts without sending everyone back to school. So in essence, this is not so much about a testing strategy, it's much more a recipe for creating a high-performing and adaptable and harmonious testing culture. I personally believe that in our fast-paced world of software development, that this is worth its weight in gold. Let's talk benefits, and let's start with test creation. With a shared language, testers, so for example, JavaScript, with the shared language JavaScript, testers can leverage familiar constructs and patterns. And as you probably already know, Cypress promotes working with certain patterns, with its own best practices for writing and organizing test cases. So if you use this reduces misunderstanding and also boosts productivity and also boosts learning, because you all understand each other's work. So such standardization is vital for maintaining our unified test framework in our language-first approach. And also a well-defined framework or architecture, you might even say, it also should offer modularity, which is a key benefit. So this means that individual components, test cases, utilities, configurations can be developed and maintained separately. So you could compare it probably to custom commands we all know within Cypress, but the difference is here that these individual components are more sort of cornerstones for your framework design. They often share certain standardizations and also help guarantee a unified way of coding for your specific projects where you're working for. By doing so, not only do we take control of our technology, but it also helps the teams to focus on what they do best. And what they do best is writing great test cases. So that's actually excellent. That's for test creation. Let's move to the review phase. Here we also can see a significant shift. Our tests now can go through the same rigorous code review processes as the development team. So we are fostering collaboration, actually. Developers and testers can review each other's work, share insights, and also get a shared understanding of both the code and the test cases and the coverage there. So it's very interesting. We can also, and next to that, we can also go, if you think about it from a more strategic level, we can also create alignment there. Because, for example, you could argue with the developers, what type of repositories do you use? What strategy is there? Are we using mono repositories, or you have like a micro architecture? So we can use the same architecture. We can use the same branching strategies, code reviews, continuous integration pipelines, and basically we can follow the same strategy. But we can also make proper choices why we don't want to use the same strategy. And I think that is okay too, as long as you think about it beforehand and make sure your way of working is flexible and adaptable to change. And that's actually what I think is very, very interesting, because now we're all sharing everything together. And by sharing utility functions, helper libraries, but you have more other dependencies, you can even develop those together with your developer colleagues. But next to actually developing technical stuff, you can also, you're also sharing knowledge all the time. And by doing this in practice with my clients, what I've come to experience is that developers will become more aware of writing tests too. So I've seen developers who started doing maintenance on test cases I've created, and where I, as tester, actually could also fix minor issues in their front end code. So all in collaboration, of course. We're all reviewing each other's work, so not only do we do work together, we're also helping each other grow as well. And I think that's really, really cool. Now, what does this all mean in the grand scheme of things? Well, I think it means we're not just testing anymore. We're becoming more and more an integral part of the development process. Together, we are creating a higher quality software, and we're building a team dynamic which is very cohesive, which will also truly adhere to the DevOps mindset, I think. So by embracing this language-first approach, we're not just changing how we test, we're changing how we work, how we collaborate with other testers and with developers as well. Well, that's all very cool, of course, but something also what's very important is what does it do with the testers? So let's talk about us, the unsung heroes of the software world. And here's where it gets really exciting, because I think when you use the language-first approach, we are promoting autonomy. We're giving our testers the freedom to create, to review, to execute, and document tests using their preferred methods. It's almost like we're saying, here's the destination. How you get there, that's up to you. And you don't have to panic about testers doing stuff they don't have to do, going rogue maybe. You have to remember this is actually, this is a sort of freedom which actually comes with a framework. So it's like flexibility with guardrails. We're not throwing the testers into the Wild West of testing. We're giving them like a map and a compass and saying, go ahead, you are in control. You're the owner of everything. So ownership in here is very important. Also, this approach allows our testers to innovate, to experiment. If you got a wild idea for a new testing technique, you can try it out. If you can improve our existing methods, you can give it a go. So we're really aiming here for a culture of innovation. We're really trying to foster that. So, and all within the bounds of our guidelines, of our framework, of course. You're basically creating a sort of learning culture, and because of this approach, it's also easier for an organization to help testers grow in their role and set out a development path for them as well. By doing this, it doesn't really matter if you're a novice or you get years of experience, because with the language-first approach, there's room for everyone to be effective and productive for what they're up to. But also very important, if you do this, how do you make sure you keep quality on a high level? Not only for the applications you're testing, but also the quality for the process, your way of working as well. With this approach, we are positioning ourselves as I believe, as an internal software supplier, because we can now, we are creating specific functionality or components to share between different testing teams or different testing projects and tools. That's basically what a software supplier does, of course. And so we should test them as well. So they also come with their own spec files as well. And how do you make sure this quality keeps up to par? You got your spec files, you got your tests, you got your code reviews and your pull requests in place, but you still have to test it as well. And I personally like using techniques like integration testing here, maybe a little bit unit testing and everything. I think that's very important. Why I am very explicit about this is actually because I think, if you think about it, their development environments are actually your production environments from your perspective. So you have to make sure that your code is tested very, very well. And also very important, don't have to forget that your clients are actually other testers. So they're probably the most critical and sharp clients you will ever meet. So again, it's very important if you do this, make sure everything is up to par. So let's get practical. How do we implement a language-first approach? I don't think it's very, very difficult. It's not as difficult as trying to assemble some IKEA furniture without instructions, for example. You just have to start with the basics. So for this example, let's start with our weapon of choice. I say let's start with a language. Let's start with TypeScript, for example, because in this case, our colleague developers use it as well. So we all speak the same language from now on. We also agree that we follow the same practices, work following certain best practices where possible, of course. So that way we can make sure that our code is built by the same development quality standards as the application code. And we can also utilize Cypress as it is meant. So this will guarantee that it's shareable, it's adaptable, and you can fall back on support by your colleagues and by the community. Also, for the sake of argument, we're going to say that two teams work with Cypress. Another one, again, works with another tool which uses TypeScript in the current ecosystem. All those tools are chosen based on specific requirements for this project. And both tools also have to interact with the same key components of the application under development. So where are you going to start? Now, I personally think it's very important that you don't overcomplicate things, because we're not trying to build a space rocket here. We're not, like we discussed in the beginning of this presentation, trying to create a very impressive and complex test framework. This is not our focus. We're focusing on what to test, not how to test it, or the framework in this case, how to test it. So we're going to start with the basics. So what I mean by that is that you first have to identify common functionality needed for all teams. So how do you do that? I personally think it's very, very simple to just start writing your first tests and compare them together with each other, also with tests from other teams. And if you compare them, you're probably going to see certain behavior in the technical landscape, which you have to adapt to. So there are probably some challenges there. And also you get a sense of what's already there and what is also a sort of generic functionality in different projects. Again, if you use pull requests to review each other's code, that's also a very great opportunity to identify common functionality, move to a separate repository so it can be shared. And well, I said earlier, there are the cornerstones of the application. So you should think about login handlers, testing hooks, or maybe even specific functionality to work with certain platforms you're working with. It can be anything actually, from the most generic testing functions to very specific functionality, which is very specific for your tech stack where you're working with. Also, remember when I said you're an internal software supplier, this is actually what I mean. So make sure you test your software too, uphold to the highest standards, as I mentioned earlier. So that's actually how you start. You first write your first test cases, you identify the functionality you want to share. If that is there in place, you can extract it from your test cases, rewrite it, put it in a separate repository and test it there. Now, if that's all good and done, everything is order, the next step, of course, is to distribute our code. So other projects can import it as well as a dependency project. The most easy way to do this, I personally think, is use the package manager the development team uses. You're probably using it as well for your current project. So let's say it's npm here. And by doing so, you have actually made it possible for other teams to use your specific functionality as well. That's actually the technical foundation. I don't think it's very difficult, but I think it's very essential to do this, to work this way. But next to that, also don't forget to bring your team along on this journey, of course. Because again, this is not so much about the technical implementation and the tools. It really is a shift in mindset. So if you're going to introduce this for your organization, you also need to support them through this transition, because it is a transition, and you have to help them achieve their own breakthroughs there. So you have to think yourself, if you're going to do this as a sort of test lead, as a tour guide, and lead your team through this new landscape of testing. Also, you might need to organize some workshops maybe to get them up to speed, introduce some coaching sessions with your colleagues along the way, really help them to get into the right mindset of working this way. Also, I think it's a great opportunity to use agile processes, which are already, if they're in place in your organization, of course. Examples are refinements to refine the testing needs, not so much about acceptance criteria, but really to identify and register test cases, the prerequisites for those test cases, dependencies that are needed. I really recommend doing this, not only because to get to know what you need for your test automation, but also to share with your teammates, and also to create a sense of importance and awareness of quality in this sense. So it's really helping to grow them as well. So yeah, well, as I mentioned earlier, this is not so much about implementing only a new approach. We're actually creating a sort of new testing culture here, a learning culture. So if you use those methods, coaching, training, use the agile processes, you really get people excited. You can really get people engaged. You can really get them to go out and try out new ideas and innovations. So in essence, it's very important to collaborate together, to teach each other new things. I really believe that places like chapters or communities of practice will become more and more important for this. I think this is really, really cool if you can make this happen. Well, that was actually the story. So let's wrap up. I really encourage you all to embrace the language first approach. Don't start with tooling, start first with the basics. And by doing this, you'll be able to leverage Cypress much more effectively and also create a sustainable testing strategy, which is adaptable to internal changes and external changes at the same time. I think it's also an excellent starting point if you're going to transition from another tool to Cypress, because you're already making your important test code independent of tooling in that sense. So you're already one step ahead. And also, again, it's very important you're fostering a culture of continuous learning, collaboration, and innovation in your testing practices. I really believe that the field of test automation will always evolve, and I think this approach really positions you to evolve with it. The more we can share our experiences and insights, the more we can maximize the benefits of tools like Cypress within our own testing strategy. And I think it's really, really cool. Well, that is all. I really want to thank you all for your time and attention. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you got excited like I am, and that you're going to try this out yourselves. Because I really think in the end, well, testing it is just fun, and we all want to be happy testers here. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Paul. I really enjoyed your talk. This idea of empowering testers to operate independently, I think supports the point that was a big takeaway for me from the conference yesterday, and that is treating your test code like application code, especially your point about the clients being testers themselves. I think that was real spot on. We have a couple questions coming in from the audience, and I'd like to share some on screen to talk through with you. So our first one is, how did adopting a language-first approach impact your own workflow, and did it change the way that you design tests?
Well, yeah, it did actually. I'm somebody who learns best by trial and error, and sometimes you just are. Well, I work as freelance, so sometimes you're just hired into existing projects where they're already well on the way, and you have to adapt to what there is already. And there are always certain choices, certain tools available, where you already can see that it might not be the best option there. You already see restrictions in place. You already see workarounds in place. You already see flaky test cases, and well, I do like to get technical. I do like to challenge the organization on a process way, but also on a technical way. So what I would like to do always is just to enter this discussion there. Why did you choose the tool, and what do you want to achieve with it? And by asking those questions, the first answer is always that it's something they prefer, they have experience with, or maybe they just had certain licenses already bought, so that is the tool that they want to use. And what I always do, and it's something I always do then on my own, is actually create a use case over the weekend or in the evening or something, and just show them how I would approach it, so they can compare it. And that's actually how I was able to turn certain clients from using certain Selenium implementations and started using Cypress implementations, which I showed them. So it's really, but still, as a freelancer, you don't always have the possibility to make your own choices. So you do have to adapt. But again, just be bold and show what other possibilities are there and what the progress is there. I personally am a big fan of productivity and effectivity as well. So I get really aggravated when I see I'm doing something which can be done much better. So I will show them that it's possible.
Yeah, that's I love the tip that you have about doing like a proof of concept, and that kind of focuses on a conversation that was going on in chat during your presentation about, how difficult it can be to achieve a consensus even among your own work teams. You've mentioned about how a lot of conversation out in the community in general is comparing one tool to another. So I think that proof of concept that you mentioned would be a really great way to kind of help bring the team together to achieve a language-first approach.
Yeah,
another question that we have from the audience, how can we include performance testing along with end-to-end in our language discussion?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because those are very, very different topics from my perspective, which have very different goals and are probably different phases in the projects that you're working on. I always try to test as close to the development code in place. So I do a lot of shifting left if that's possible. But I think if you're going to use it, if you want to integrate it with what you have already, I think it's I think you should do it on more in the end of your development project, more where you're already on acceptance, where you already have a good feel of quality there, where I personally like to use a sort of 80-20 rule, that 80% of my test case I test vertically through the application, so more detailed to all the different components or functionalities, and only 20% I would like to test end-to-end are actually more happy flows, just to see that the handshake between front end and back end is working properly. So if I think about it in the short term, I think that would be the best place if I want to integrate performance testing as well. And in that environment where testing is being done more horizontal through the application, more from a customer journey perspective, to get a sense of what is possible there. But again, there are a lot of different factors in place with performance testing as well, because you need benchmarking. What type of performance are you going to test? Are you going to do load testing or stress testing or whatever? So it's a very you can get I can give a very elaborate answer about this, but I think in a nutshell, this is actually it.
Awesome. Thank you. And we have time for one more question. I'm going to share that to the screen now. So you mentioned in your last answer, talking specifically about shift left and using this language first approach. Does that have any implications to the process of shift left? And if so, can you talk a little bit about that?
It does have some implications, because I think if you shift left, you're already investing into being more a sort of integral part of the development process. So you're already saying to the developers, okay, I want to work very close with you. I want to build my tests almost at the same moment as you're developing, if that's possible. And I'm also going to test much more on a more technical level, and especially if you're going to use component testing, of course, because it's very close to unit testing. So yeah, if you're doing that, you're already committed to speaking the same language as your developers, but much more implicit. And the only difference with the language first approach there is that you're saying we're doing this only for this project, but there might be other projects and other teams in your organization as well. So if you wanted to approach this from a more architectural perspective or strategical perspective, you should first talk to all the other teams how they test, and if they also are going to are willing to work shift left, and if they have the right tools there in place, if they want to use those, or are they open to use other tools. And then you can have a discussion, okay, what language are we going to introduce? What best practice are we going to follow? What code review patterns are we going to follow? Because those questions should be answered first before really implementing the language first approach. So you really have to first approach from a strategical level, and then you can fill it in actually. But again, if you're working shift left, you're already speaking the same language as the developers, but then you're only isolated for your project. And that's actually the power of this, is actually that you can also be adaptable to your entire environment. So that's actually very interesting.
Awesome. Paul, thank you so much. That's all the questions we have time for.